What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to this week's installment on The Lake Show, and I really appreciate you all making me a part of your day again. So obviously last week I went over a couple news stories that were, just weighing on my mind a little bit. I talked a little bit about the NFL draft. I talked about the New York Jets signing Justin Fields to such a long contract and realistically how well that's going to pan out. And for anybody who stayed tuned for that episode, everybody knows that I am not big on Justin Fields. I am not big on him going to the New York Jets just because of the defensive culture that they have set there. And they have all the weapons that are necessary to compete in the AFC. But again, it all comes back to Justin Fields and how well he has developed as a quarterback. And personally, I don't see the New York Jets doing anything of note in the AFC this year. And, I think this is Justin Fields' last chance to prove that he is a starter in the NFL. After that, if he bombs in New York just like Aaron Rodgers did, then he's going to be a career backup. He's going to be a career journeyman, pretty much. At least that's how I see Justin Fields. It's a shame because I've always had a soft spot for Justin Fields, his talent as a quarterback, going to Ohio State and nearly winning a national title with them. But it's just reality right now. He's gone to a dumpster fire organization in Chicago that basically ruined him as a prospect, and then on to Pittsburgh where he showed some flash, but didn't necessarily play great, didn't play bad, but didn't play great. And now all that mediocre play has awarded him a $40 million contract with New York. Again, we're going to see how well it goes. Me personally, I do not see the New York Jets doing much next year. If anything, I think they finished third in the AFC East behind Buffalo and New England. I'm actually one of the few people that believe New England is on the upside. I think Miami's really going to be trash this year for whatever reason. I'm not entirely sold on Miami. But either way, that was last week's episode. We got brand new stories for this week, some NBA, some college basketball, some football. It's going to be a good time. And as you all know, I'm a Bucked Up ambassador, so use promo code SHOW32. Get yourself 20% off any and all pre-workout orders at buckedup.com. And again, if you are not already, please like and subscribe to the channel. It costs absolutely nothing. All it does is just help me out, continuously grow the channel. And, I'm very appreciative to all of you. We're at 210 subscribers right now on YouTube. I'm very happy about that. We're just continuing to grow. And again, I do this as a hobby. I don't do it for money. I don't do it for anything else other than sheer enjoyment out of doing sports talk show. And, that's something I like to strive to do. But again, I give all praise and glory and honor to the one true God, Jesus Christ, for allowing me to do this every single day, every single week. Again, I lean on him when times are tough, and he never lets me down. And he brings me so much joy into my life and just keep on living. And with that, we're going to get started today in men's college basketball. The Final Four took place this past weekend. We saw pretty much the biggest choke I've seen watching college basketball of note recently. And I'm, of course, talking about the Houston Cougars and the Duke Blue Devils. So I'm just going to roll the clip. This was the final seconds of the Final Four matchup between Houston and Duke. And, Cooper Flagg had it right there, but this is what happened.
Makes his move. Flagg, back in. Flagg, short. Rebounded by Houston. You got a foul. Got a foul. 3.4 when they called the foul. There's 2.5, and Houston is in the driver's seat.
That's what ended up happening after Duke blew a lead that they had with 1:20 remaining in the game. Duke had a 90% chance to win this game with up less than 1:30 left to play in this game. But again, the game's not over until it's over. And Duke, honestly, this was the biggest choke that I've seen Duke have in quite a while. And this is coming from someone who doesn't honestly watch much college basketball. Again, I was out of town this past weekend, and, I was with a bunch of Duke Blue Devil fans, and just seeing the sheer anger out of everybody for the way Duke handled the last minute 20 seconds. It was just pitiful. Tyrese Proctor honestly had a terrible game for the Duke Blue Devils, going 2 for 8, 0 for 4 from 3. And then you have Cooper Flagg, who honestly will be probably the number 1 overall pick in the NBA draft, whether it's this upcoming year or years to come. He went 8 of 19, 3 for 4 from three-point range. He had 27 points, 4 assists, 2 steals, 3 blocks, 7 rebounds. Cooper Flagg was looked at as, he's the best player in college basketball. Nobody's going to dispute that. But here's that problem. I don't understand. Again, heat of the moment, the game's on the line. Who do you want to have the ball in their hands when the game's on the line? And for Duke, that is Cooper Flagg. And again, he shorts a mid-range jumper to take the lead against Houston, which, it's tough just because Duke hasn't won a national title since 2015. Since I was 15 years old, that was 10 years ago. But everybody looked at Duke as being the team to beat in the entire NCAA tournament. And now the Houston Cougars are on to the national title to play the Florida Gators. And I think that's going to be a fascinating game. But again, it's not over till it's over. And this choke job done by Duke, I think really needs to be studied by scientists. That's how bad it was. I'm sitting there surrounded by a bunch of Duke fans and just seeing what Duke was doing, just seeing just how they handled that last minute 20 was absolutely, I'm going to be honest, it was garbage. It was pitiful. And again, I'm just speaking on it. My team, the Miami Hurricanes, did not do well at all this past year. They were one of the worst teams in the ACC and honestly probably one of the worst teams in the country if I had to be brutally honest about it. This coming 2 years removed from a dream season Final Four appearance. But again, Miami's not a basketball school. So that's all I can hang my hat on and be realistic about. But just watching the way Duke choked this game and how Cooper Flagg, even though he played great, but when it mattered most, he shrunk and didn't deliver for the Duke Blue Devils. So that's a wrap for Duke's season. On to the next season, as some Duke fans I know would say. Same crap every single year, unfortunately. But this kind of screws my bracket up too, just because I had Duke winning it all. I had Duke winning the entire bracket. But, that's up in smoke, and so is my bet on that. But that's what happened this past weekend. The Houston Cougars win 70-67 and are moving on to the championship game against the Florida Gators. Okay, now we're going to talk about something else, and this is NBA related. And again, I'm not coming from a point of judgment. I'm coming just from a point of realism of who watches the NBA, and this has to do with Ja Morant and his antics. Obviously, a lot of people know Ja Morant, how talented he is. I think, he's one of the most talented athletic point guards I've personally ever seen. I put him up there with a prime Russell Westbrook and Derrick Rose, guys that I grew up with watching in their primes, how athletic they were. Not necessarily the best shooters, but hyper athletic, hyper, aggressive point guards. And I think there's a definite place for that in the NBA. It's a good breath of fresh air when you can see your point guard, move so athletically, so much speed, so much talent, so much athleticism. It's a spectacle to watch. And that's why I have a soft spot for Russell Westbrook and Derrick Rose, because those were easily my two favorite point guards watching growing up with the NBA games that I watched back then. But I'm talking mainly, everybody knows Ja Morant has been in trouble realistically for his antics, both on and off the court. When you look at Ja Morant, it has to do with his, finger shooting motions and his antics on the court, mimicking a gunshot after he made a 3-point shot against the Heat a couple days ago. And I'm just talking about this from this standpoint. Personally, I do take issue with it just because I don't necessarily think that you need that in sports. That's just me personally. Does it really bother me? Am I going to lose sleep at night if someone did a gun gesture, after making a three-pointer? Not really, because I know that they don't mean any ill will behind it. But here's for the standpoint that I take. You do have, younger audiences that watch the NBA. You have, kids that look up to you. They're you're their favorite player in the entire NBA. They go to the games to watch you. They watch you on TV. Those guys aspire to be like you. If you're in Ja Morant's case, you have people who look up to you, especially from such a younger generation. But why on earth would you just keep doing that, especially since the league is taking issue with it? The league has taken issue with Ja Morant and his antics, very seriously over the past 2 years. And it doesn't just, go back to the Heat game from 2 days ago where he made a three-pointer and did that gun hand motion, but there's a pattern developing over the past couple years. So when you look back, March 4th, 2023, he displayed a gun on an Instagram live stream at a nightclub. So that's the first issue. And then on March 5th through the 20th, 2023, he was suspended 8 games by Commissioner Adam Silver. Then you fast forward a little bit to May 15th of 2023. He brandished a firearm on a social media live video. And then in June 2023, he was suspended the first 25 games of the 2023-2024 season because of said antics. But now, after doing it again with the Heat, against the Heat a couple days ago, here's what Ja Morant said after that. And I'm quoting, of course. This is what Ja Morant said. And, the information I'm getting is just off of ESPN and First Take. So all this belongs to ESPN First Take. And here's what Ja Morant had to say on the criticism for making the finger shooting motion. I'm kind of used to it. I was pretty much a villain for 2 years now. Every little thing, if somebody can say something negative about me, it's going to be out there. So yeah, I don't care no more. End quote. Okay, so when I take a look at this, obviously Ja Morant really doesn't care. He's going to continue to do him and to not change. And here's the thing. Again, I said I don't necessarily really have a big deal of it. I just don't prefer it. That's just me. It doesn't make me uncomfortable or anything. I just think it's odd. Like, if anything, why are you choosing that of all things to celebrate? Either way. But when you look at it in my perspective, yeah, it's not good for the eye consumer, especially those who are younger and who look up to you. That being Ja Morant, who, basically want to be like you, a hyper athletic point guard, a showstopper, like an absolute superstar in the NBA when he's at his best. But now he's blatantly going against the NBA and Adam Silver, basically telling him to pound salt. He doesn't care. He's going to continue to do him. Yeah, but here's the flip side of that. You are in the NBA. You are an employee of an organization. There are rules and guidelines in all lines of work that you must follow if you are an employee. So let's say the NBA does not like this. Well, Ja Morant, maybe you should stop doing it. Even though people may not think it's such a big deal. A lot of people, myself included, don't think it's that big of a deal. Obviously, I just explained my standpoint on it that, I don't really care for it, but I'm not going to lose sleep at night if, they do this celebration or whatever. It doesn't really affect me. But, you still have younger audiences that watch that. And, I don't believe at all that's what they should be mimicking, if anything. So it's not like the Cam Newton dab from 2015. That's a little bit different. But when you look at it from this standpoint, from an organizational standpoint, you are an employee of the NBA. You are paid to play in that organization. You are paid by that organization and the owners of said team, the Memphis Grizzlies. There are rules and regulations that you must follow. If it is against your employers, wishes and rules and regulations, if it's against their rules, you got to stop doing it. Again, Jaw's probably going to get suspended again, probably fined again. I'm pretty sure I read an article that said he was fined $75,000 for that. But again, I'm just looking at it from the perspective of this. It's just like, how much more is Adam Silver going to tiptoe around it? I feel like a more severe, punishment's going to happen eventually if Ja Morant kept it up. He's making millions of dollars. I don't think $75,000 fine is really cutting it. That's like chump change to most professional athletes out there who are getting paid millions upon millions of dollars, in these professional leagues. But when you look at this, I mean, if the NBA doesn't like it, yeah, maybe you don't have a problem with it. Maybe some fans don't have a problem with it. But guess who has a problem with it? Your employer. That's who has a problem with it. So in my, humble explanation, stop doing it. I think it's very simple. It's so cut and dry. Do you need to do it? No, you don't. Now, saying stuff like this, you're just basically going straight to Adam Silver and just saying, pound salt, I don't care what you think. I'm just going to continue to do me. Well, keep that up. You're going to continue to get fined, continue to be suspended, and, result in not getting paid for those games that you're supposed to be playing. I would assume so. I'm not entirely sure 100% how the NBA contracts are structured in that way. But again, I just think it's so ridiculous. If your employer says it's not okay, then stop doing it. It's just hysterical to me how some players, they'll go against the big, mighty organization, to try and prove a point. But again, you're talking about the NBA, one of the biggest global sports leagues, in a big global sports brand. You got players from all across the world that play in the NBA. The NBA just doesn't let that slide. I don't think Adam Silver will let it slide, but that's just reality. If your employer does not like it, if your employer doesn't want you doing it, then guess what? Add the 2, carry the 3, whatever. Stop doing it. That's how I feel about Ja Morant's antics. I'm taking it from that perspective. Again, as a casual NBA fan, am I going to care too much? Not really, just because it's not endangering anyone. Again, but I did premise by saying, is that really what you want the audience at home who's watching? Is that really what you want all the kids to see? Live on TV or in person watching you play? No. So that's why I personally don't care for it and like it. Ja Morant just needs to stop. But will he? Well, based off his post-game comment, I don't necessarily believe he's going to. All right, next, we're going to move on to something I heard recently, and this has to go with LaShawn McCoy, former running back for the Philadelphia Eagles and Buffalo Bills and Kansas City Chiefs. Shady McCoy was one of my favorite running backs growing up. He was unreal when he was with Philadelphia. He was pretty good when he was with Buffalo. And then he won a Super Bowl riding Patrick Mahomes' coattails in Kansas City. But I take issue with one thing recently that he said. And, I just take a listen.
And there's no disrespect to Cam, but I'm not sure if I'm all the way sold on Cam Ward. I don't know, dog.
Why not?
I'm going to say it again. I've never seen in the whole draft, there's been a lot of busts in these drafts, right? That got a lot of attention. I've never seen a player have 0 stars in high school be the number 1 pick overall. I've never seen that.
So high school stars.
It's talent.
What? That is the most idiotic, probably the most idiotic statement I think I've ever heard about not liking a prospect in general. First of all, you're talking about something that was back in high school. You're talking about something that happened pre-COVID. Cam Ward was a 0-star recruit coming out of high school. That's well known. And then, here, just bear with me. Here's what Cam Ward, the 0-star recruit, did in his college career. So in 2020, he goes to Incarnate Word. Throws for 2,260 yards, 24 touchdowns, and only 4 interceptions, completing 60% of his passes. In 2021, at Incarnate Word, 4,648 passing yards, 47 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, completing 65.1% of his passes. Then he transfers to D1, Washington State, in 2022. 3,231 passing yards, 23 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, completing 64.4% of his passes. Move on to 2023. At Washington State, 3,735 passing yards, 25 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, completing 66% of his completions. And then his final year in college, last year, University of Miami in 2024, 4,313 yards passing, 39 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, completing 67% of his passes, Davey O'Brien winner and Heisman Trophy finalist. Is that really something that matters? Is that really something you should be saying that doesn't make you sold on an NFL prospect? I'm confused. I'm legit confused. Is it not, based off of like certain arguments I've heard, before about quarterbacks? Is he too small? Is he too heavy? Are his arms, is his hands too small? Is his accuracy off? Is his decision making off? Is his poise and leadership off? Is his feel for the pocket off? Is his mechanics off? That sort of stuff. That drives concern. But the fact that he's a 0-star recruit coming out of high school who now is going to be more than likely 99% probability that he'll be the first overall pick in the NFL draft. Why does his star count coming out of high school matter so much? I'll give you it short. It doesn't matter at all. Look at all the accolades that Cam Ward won over this past year. He originally declared for the draft in 2023 after his season with Washington. But due to, he probably would have been a mid-5th round pick going on 6th round pick. But then he comes back to college. He transfers to the University of Miami, has the best statistical passing season and passing touchdowns in Miami history, has them within one game of the ACC title game and the college football playoff, won the Davey O'Brien Award, and set numerous Hurricane records and was a finalist for the Heisman Trophy. LaShawn McCoy, one of my favorite running backs of all time. Legit, one of my favorite running backs of all time. Couldn't get enough of Shady McCoy when I saw a Philadelphia Eagles game back when I was 15 years old, or 13, whatever. Watching him and Michael Vick at that point in time was just unreal. He was magical. But as far as being an analyst, and when you make claims like that, there's nothing I can say. I think that was the most ridiculous argument I have ever heard for any prospect. Of course, this hits a little close to home because that's my favorite player in this upcoming draft and from my favorite college. Of course, I'll defend him in this aspect. But again, I don't think anybody who watches sports talk show, realistically think Shady McCoy's point is valid in regards to whether a prospect for the NFL, whether you wouldn't be sold on him or not. I think that was just absolutely ridiculous, and I got quite the laugh out of that. Okay, we're going to move on to our final topic today. This is a fun episode to do. We're going to be talking about my other favorite team. We're going to talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers again. Yinzer Nation, we're going to be talking about, yet again, the quarterback situation. Aaron Rodgers, at the time of recording this video, obviously it could change when this is posted on Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. This could be a totally different scenario. Aaron Rodgers probably could have signed with Pittsburgh by this point, but I'm willing to believe that that's not the case. When you look at Aaron Rodgers, yet again, he is still not fully committed to signing with Pittsburgh at this moment in time. No deal is done. I heard that there's a deal on the table for Aaron Rodgers to become the Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback. And again, Aaron Rodgers was working out with DK Metcalf. They were throwing passes and catching passes together. So, all signs are pointing to that Aaron Rodgers will sign with Pittsburgh. But again, I don't understand the hesitancy behind it. So realistically, I have a problem with two parties, Aaron Rodgers and Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, because they have no plan still. They still have no set plan for the future of this franchise at the most important position in the NFL and realistically the entirety of football as a sport. You need an A-plus quarterback, and then everything else will fall into place. The fact that Pittsburgh has spent so much capital on defense, this is a defensive culture and has been since the 80s. It's never really been an offensive, powerhouse other than the years with Ben Roethlisberger and Terry Bradshaw, those two respected, eras of football. Again, it was always the Pittsburgh defense was always the cornerstone of each and every team. Terry Bradshaw, Hall of Famer. He had so many Hall of Famers around him on the offensive side of the football. But that's not what Pittsburgh was known for. When you had Jack Lambert, when you had Rod Woodson, when you had Mean Joe Green, when you had that monstrous steel curtain defense, that's what those teams were known for. Yeah, they had a prolific offense that could score in bunches and still put up points, but nobody thinks about the Pittsburgh Steelers back in the 80s and 90s and, 70s. Nobody thinks about the offenses that they had. Everybody thinks about the hardcore defensive monstrosity that they put on the field that literally nobody can beat. And then moving on to the later years, early 2000s, mid-2010s, and later 2010s, then you have the Ben Roethlisberger era, which was realistically led by those defenses with Troy Polamalu, James Harrison, Lamar Woodley, Casey Hampton, Ike Taylor, Ryan Clark. That culmination of defensive players, that's what really led Pittsburgh to two Super Bowls, Super Bowl 40 and Super Bowl 43 during Big Ben's career. Again, Big Ben had prolific offenses later on in years, and it didn't result to much. It didn't. But that's because Pittsburgh's defense was so putrid at that point in time, they couldn't stop a nosebleed and they couldn't stop a sentence with a period, that the offense had no choice but to put up 50 points a game. Otherwise, they lose that game. Now, looking at it all to right now, who does Pittsburgh have on roster for quarterback? Mason Rudolph and Skylar Thompson. And the fact that last week, I believe it was last week, Mike Tomlin said something along the lines like he would be comfortable if Mason Rudolph was the starter for the Pittsburgh Steelers in 2025. I'm sorry. I'm so far off board of that notion because years ago, it was my first Steeler game that I went to in a couple of years at this point. Big Ben was injured that year. In comes Mason Rudolph. Mason Rudolph was with Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh, I went to Heinz Field. I watched the game. It was Pittsburgh against, at this point in time, the 0-10 Detroit Lions. This is before the Lions became a juggernaut with Dan Campbell. I watched that game go into overtime, and I watched Mason Rudolph absolutely play awful. Basically, that entire game basically did nothing of note, and Pittsburgh ended up tying the 0-10 Lions that game. I saw everything I needed to see from Mason Rudolph after that game. I knew he wouldn't be the successor to Big Ben because even before that, he wasn't really a wow quarterback. But just the fact that you have Mason Rudolph and Skylar Thompson and nothing else on roster, how much more pitiful can you get? Honestly, looking at it, this is a top roster. If you gave Patrick Mahomes these weapons, if you gave him DK Metcalf, George Pickens, Pat Freiermuth, Denzel Washington, Jalen Warren. You know, if you gave him all these weapons, you know, he would be in good standing too. You know, he would lead Pittsburgh probably to the Super Bowl. And Patrick Mahomes does it seemingly year in and year out with less talent than what Pittsburgh does. Pittsburgh drafts wide receivers and develops wide receivers better than pretty much anybody in the NFL. I can think of all the great wide receivers Pittsburgh has had over the better part of, 15 years. You had Hines Ward, Antoine Randall, Antonio Brown, Emmanuel Sanders, Juju Smith-Schuster, George Pickens, Chase Claypool, Deontay Johnson. Pittsburgh just does wide receiver well. They have a great feel for wide receiver. They have a terrible feel for quarterback. They thought Kenny Pickett was the answer. And after, Kenny Pickett started some games that one year and led Pittsburgh to the wild card round only to lose, I thought, okay, there's something here. And then Kenny Pickett showed his true colors and really proved that he is not a starting quarterback in the NFL. And it realistically showed because that draft class, a lot of people compare this upcoming 2025 draft class to that quarterback draft class with Kenny Pickett and all those guys and Stetson Bennett. That quarterback class was far worse than I think what we have this year with Cam Ward, Jackson Dart, Shedeur Sanders, Jalen Milroe, Quinn Ewers, Will Howard, Dylan Gabriel, all those guys. Just looking at Pittsburgh as a whole right now, again, I have a problem with Aaron Rodgers because, what are you waiting for? What exactly is holding you up from, reaching a deal and signing your deal with Pittsburgh? You're not ending your career on your terms, really, unless you retire. Then you end it on your terms. But if you want a chance to prove that, you still have something left in the tank and can compete not only for the AFC North, but for the AFC in general and for the Super Bowl, well, if you don't want your legacy to be the Jets and, having so many shortcomings in the NFL playoffs since you won Super Bowl 45, your one and only Super Bowl, you better sign your deal. And on the flip side, for Pittsburgh, the fact that you let it get to this situation where basically your franchise hangs in the balance of Aaron Rodgers' decision, that's pitiful. I gave plenty of solutions that Pittsburgh could possibly, do going in to at least get a quarterback of the future. And again, I'm going to talk about this rumor real quick. I heard Pittsburgh with the 21st overall pick is thinking, again, this could be smoke and mirrors. I don't know, but I heard, through the grapevine of like Instagram and everything and all those who cover professional sports, more often than I do, that Pittsburgh is they're thinking about possibly taking Jalen Milroe at the 21st overall pick in the draft. You are getting 30% of what Lamar Jackson is. I'll give Jalen Milroe credit. He is one heck of an athlete. He can really run the football. His accuracy is spotty. Small hands, small, in general quarterback. I think if Pittsburgh was able to draft him and get 60% of what Lamar Jackson is, sure, I'd consider that a win. But looking at it, I do not want Jalen Milroe on Pittsburgh, at all. I'd be more comfortable with a Jackson Dart or a Quinn Ewers before I would be comfortable with a Jalen Milroe, who hasn't shown any consistency as a passer. I'd be pretty good passing to a freshman sensation like Ryan Williams in college too if I was a quarterback. I'd have pretty good success doing that too. But just Pittsburgh in general, they're a mess. They have no sense of direction for their future. And honestly, I'm just tired of it. There's really nothing else to say as a Pittsburgh fan other than, we're tired of it. It's the same crap year in and year out. And that's going to wrap it up this week on The Lake Show, everyone. Again, I really appreciate you all making me a part of your day. If you're not already, please like and subscribe to the channel. You're really helping it out. You're helping it grow. And, I'm very appreciative for all of you making me a part of your day. Be sure to like, subscribe, share with your friends, leave some comments down below. I'm your host, Dominic Lako. God bless.
I love the chase and the hunt, and I set the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank, no I'm funded. Play the game like it's nothing. I'm always thankful for something. Don't take for granted, stay humble. Now wake up! It's time to look at the enemy. Look in the mirror if